Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, I'd like to call this special meeting of the Anchorage Assembly to order. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ms. Allard?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy? Here. Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Here.
Ms. Zolotel?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Next, we have the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Wheeler, if you could please lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next, we have the land acknowledgement. Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement recognizing the indigenous people of a place. It is a public gesture of appreciation for the past and present indigenous stewardship of the lands that we now occupy. An actual statement that marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. The Anchorage Assembly would like to acknowledge we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. It is with gratefulness and respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cook Inlet Dena'ina.
Thank you. All right, so we have two items of business before us tonight. In a minute, I am going to ask Barbara to speak to issues with the Elections Commission that are going to cause us to postpone taking action on either of these items to the meeting of May 25th. After such a motion is dealt with for both 4A and 4B, we will move on to audience participation. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the clerk to speak to the issues with the Elections Commission. So just for the record, the clerk is looking a document up and then she will begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think many people who are here and the Assembly members know that the Anchorage Election Commission held its public session of canvass on the recount for school board seat B and E last night, beginning at 5, and they finished at about 8:40 p.m. Unfortunately, because it was late, the commission adjourned the meeting before adopting its report. It was on the agenda, but it was just overlooked. Although there is some ambiguity in one section of the code regarding the commission reporting to the assembly about the recount, there is another provision of the code which is clearer, and it states that upon completion of the public session of canvass, the Election Commission shall adopt a report of the commission's ballot review for submission to the assembly. And we believe it is most prudent to interpret the provisions of the code that require the commission to adopt a report on the record. Because the commission did not do so and could not hold a meeting today to adopt its report within the 24 hours notice, the staff has plans to reschedule the commission meeting for this Friday, May 21st, to adopt its report on the recounts on the record. For all of those reasons, the staff is also, since the assembly is scheduled to consider the certification of the recounts tonight, it's requested that the assembly postpone until its May 25th regular meeting the following two items on the agenda: the certification of the recount for school board seat B and the certification of the recount for seat E. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, so with that, the first item we have before us is item 4A, AM 309-2021, certification of the recount for school board seat B. Mr. Vice Chair?
Move to postpone until the meeting of May 25th. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, members may proceed to vote on the motion to postpone to the meeting of May 25th.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
Can we get that volume in? We heard it, but I just need...
Oh, okay. Mr. Perez-Verdia, could you please repeat that again, your vote on that item?
I voted yes.
Much better. Thank you very much. Okay.
That motion passes 10-0, so this will be back before us on the 25th. Next, we have item 4B, AM 340-2021, certification of the recount for school board seat E. Mr. Vice Chair?
Move to postpone until the meeting of May 25.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
That motion is approved 10-0. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to ask me to do that?
All right, so at this time, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to the clerk to just give a brief report on the recount, and then we will turn it over to audience participation.
Quick point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Constant.
Not sure why, but OnBase is showing executive session on the agenda.
Yeah, I think that has to do with how the agenda was built, but that is not the incorrect part of our agenda.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you asked me to be brief, but it is not one of my strengths. I apologize in advance for that. I did prepare some notes in advance of the recount in April when we did each recount, and there are 7 steps. So I'll still try to be brief, but 7 is my favorite number, and that's what we're going to go with. So at the beginning of each recount, we started with, we are here to do a recount, as I said in my email, and I believe this is how we do democracy. We couldn't do democracy without our staff, and I introduced the core staff and explained their roles at the election center and in the recount. Next, I explained that one recount was a mandatory recount that was per 2890.025C, where the clerk shall initiate a recount within 7 days of the adoption of the Election Commission's report if it concludes a candidate, proposition, or measure wins or passes by less than a 0.5% margin. And the second recount was pursuant to 28.90.025B. On the clerk's initiative, we can conduct a recount because in the clerk's judgment, conducting a recount may increase voter confidence in the election process. The third thing that happened was we discussed the code, which is one of my favorite documents, and 2890.040B specifies that candidates or organized groups having a direct interest in a recount may provide 2 observers to witness the recount. We continued and said that because the recount really focused on the top 2 candidates, we determined that the top 2 candidates in each race would be provided more access for their candidate observers. And basically what that meant was they got to sit in the front row. After that, we reviewed the code, and the code specifies that in conducting the recount, the election officials shall review all ballots to determine which votes are to be counted in the recount and to declare which ballot will be recounted. I explained that we would be reviewing the adjudicated ballots and approximately 10 random ballots per campaign. We also reviewed all write-in ballots. And then the code continues and says, when available, the recount shall be limited to reviewing the electronic version of the ballot images, adjudicating those images, tabulating, which means counting, and comparing them to the original count. And this is what we did. We provided a copy of the code on the recount and the adjudication rules to all of the candidates and the observers in those races, and I believe that was in an email, and we may have had copies as well at the election center on the recount date. So the fourth item that we discussed, it's going much faster than I thought, was that we had limited space at the election center. Even so, we added a larger screen to mirror the activity so the candidates and observers can view it. In other words, we installed a 60-inch screen that is really cool so people could view the screen given the COVID limitations at the time. Then we asked the 2 designated observers for each campaign, and they got to sit in the front row. And so one observer from each campaign got the front row, and then the second observer from each campaign got the back row. And then there were a whole bunch of other people behind them. But again, they were probably about, maybe 2 to 3 feet away from the screen. Probably not what your eye doctor would recommend. Then we asked for one spokesperson from each campaign or from each of the top 2 candidates, because we didn't want to have conflicting information coming from them. So each campaign designated one spokesperson. So then Erica McConnell was charged with providing challenge forms for each spokesperson. We informed the groups that if they needed copies of their challenges, we'd make copies at the end of the day because we believed that the code required us to provide a copy to the other side and believed it required them to provide it to us. So I let them know that Amy would probably be making copies, and I introduced them to Amy. Then we moved over to the scanning adjudication tabulation system, and I let them know that we would review the process one more time because it is pretty complicated. And we told the groups that the observer spokesperson had a question. We wanted them to say stop. Then we would stop and explain or discuss the ballot. And if the observer wanted to renew the challenge, the observer would say challenge, and then they would document it on their form. We had originally thought that we would quarantine the challenge ballots, but we explained to the observers that we couldn't do that because we figured out we wouldn't be able to count or tabulate at the end of the election. We told the observers that even if they didn't say challenge, they could still challenge the ballot. Number 7, the last step was that we reviewed the adjudication of 20 additional ballots, and what happened was we allowed each campaign to randomly select about 10 to 15 ballots, and we made up a little cheat sheet like this, and everybody got about 10 of these. I think there was an extra campaign, so they may not have had all 10. And then everybody put the number of the ballot that we wanted, and we reviewed all of those ballots as well. And that's it. And if you have any questions for me, you can let me know.
Great, thank you for that explanation. All right, at this point, we're going to go ahead and move on to audience participation. So members of the public are going to have to speak. Please make sure to state your name for the record. And if you do have questions regarding the certification of the election, feel free to ask those, and we will likely address them when we deal with the certification on May 25th. At this point, welcome.
Yes, my name is Charles McKee. For the record, I'm a beneficiary of the McKee Trust, so therefore I'm self-insured and filed and recorded in the state of Alaska and the State Department, Washington, D.C. So with that, I want to bring to your attention that I had sent this same packet that I delivered to you last meeting to Washington, D.C. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. So I was speaking to the chair, to the clerk, to the United States District Attorney here in Anchorage, that fact, and you might notice on this front page, since I was given an injunction by the corporate court for a public defender's assistance, I used their assistance to notify the court yesterday that that had been the case. So they've been put on notice. And this particular municipal clerk knows, just like the clerk of court, corporate court, that structural integrity is severely diminished when a defendant testifies in court and then the tape has been changed in the favor of the court. So what you say under record is not what is on the transcription of that record, even though you have witnesses. It diminishes your ability to win on appeal. But again, it takes away the structural integrity of the corporate court system when the clerk loses control of the documented hearing recorded. And that's what happened 9/20 2019 with a core officer of the court witnessing it, federal, and I didn't know she was. I was using her as my paralegal. So I point out the fact that with the third letter in, the city is implicated in causing my harm to me because the letter to my landlord by the code enforcement. And on a notation down below that, what happened when I whistleblowed against the governor's bill, which resulted in the notification of Jack Frost doing what he did to me.
Thank you. My apologies, but as folks know, I typically like to start with folks on the phone and then go back and forth. So we do have, one individual on the phone that we'll go ahead and go to. So we're going to call Miss Judy Elledge, and then we'll go back to in-person.
You have reached an unassigned number at Aetna.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, although I know she might be out of town. I think Crystal just told him that. Yeah, just told him. We'll see what happens.
The digit 0 or 1 is not recorded. You have reached Judy Elledge at 351-187.
Okay, we will try her again later. We'll go ahead and go back to in-person. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Dustin Sherman. I'll be brief, real quick. I got a couple questions for the clerk, and I'm sure you guys will cover this on May 25th, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How many votes were counted in the school board election? The two that were, the one that was contested and the other one that automatically had the recount. I asked that because I'd like to know how many total votes were cast and how many were counted in the recounts. I think that the public should know that. Two, why is the election taking so long? I thought mail-in votes were supposed to be quick, concise, transparent, things like that. And I guess there's a third question. I witnessed on election night people leaving, going in and out of the building down at the election center at 11 o'clock after people were told that they weren't supposed to be there after like 9:30. So there's a lot of questions up in the air right now. I think that the public needs to know those answers. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name is Kelly Lessons. I was a candidate for School Board Seat B. It's a pleasure to be before you tonight. I think I'm now an official school board member. I've been sworn in and voted on a few things. I just wanted to be here tonight to express my gratitude to Ms. Jones and her staff for conducting a long, drawn-out, but very thoughtful recount process. It was my first and only recount thus far, but I was impressed at the time she took to explain everything to everyone. I was impressed at the accuracy of the random sample ballots that every campaign sort of created these magic numbers, and we just pulled that ballot. They were 100% accurate. I was dismayed that 10,000 people didn't vote down ballot. I was dismayed that people wrote in Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and other crass and sophomoric throwaway votes. I think a lot of people are here tonight because they believe that elections are important, that our votes are important. And as a candidate, as a parent, as a citizen, I believe it's our responsibility to vote with integrity. There were people who did not care enough to vote. And I think that's the tragedy of this election. But from my standpoint, what Ms. Jones and her staff have done has been nothing short of impeccable. And I'm sorry that there wasn't the official rubber stamp, I guess, yesterday evening, but I appreciate her work and the diligence of her staff. And I just wanted to express that here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Dustin Darden. Reasons not to certify this election. This election was held by mail. There's no way to adequately determine that the ballots that were mailed out came from the individual who was registered to vote. One primary issue with ballots being mailed out is the simple fraudulated post office stamp that you can make out of a potato and a pocket knife. And then you harvest several ballots that are known to be mailed to multiple households. People receiving 15 ballots for 3 people live in their house, or one person receiving 2 ballots with the exact same name. There's no way you can tabulate these possible frauds. Also, I witnessed at the Alaska Department of Elections a state official election worker being handed an envelope that was a municipal ballot during this election, unsupervised, in a room that was labeled to be closed for this fraudulent, manipulated false emergency that you are now covering your faces for. She was not being supervised, and there was no sealed container for the ballot to go into. I further investigated this matter, and the individual I spoke with, the state of Alaska I spoke with, said that there are several people that come here to drop off ballots. Also, at the Anchorage Municipal Election Headquarters in downtown Anchorage, I witnessed a woman walking out of the election headquarters that was an election worker with a manila envelope, also with a bag and a clipboard, and she was thoroughly clothed from her neck down to her feet. Now, she was walking out of that building with empty bags. How can you verify that when she walks back into that building that those bags are not filled? Also, through the chair, Christopher Constant was on record passing floral cuttings in a container through the chair to the acting clerk. What was inside the contents of that vase, I wonder? Through the chair, there could have been a rock hammer inside of there that could have tunneled down into the adjacent left-leaning headquarters where they could simply funnel in envelopes. Any questions?
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Bernadette Wilson. In school board seat B in April, you had more than 65,000 votes that were cast. More than 65,000 votes that were cast. The municipal clerk sent out an email to the candidates in that race and said that all ballots would be recounted, all ballots. Yet only 1,100 roughly were recounted. That is not all ballots. The reason that the code says that if it is less than a 0.5% margin or less, that it is a mandatory recount because they recognize that there could be human error. 1,100 out of 6,500 after the clerk said that all ballots would be recounted. I also find it a little odd that you have a school board a supposed member here who says that she swore in before this body has even certified the election. And contrary to her opinion, no, it's not your job to be a rubber stamp. So let's clear that out of the way. Your municipal clerk, who works directly for you, also sent out an email to all of those candidates telling them that their representative could speak on behalf of them. Last night we find out at the commission meeting that no, you had to have been an observer, not just a representative, but that's what the clerk sent out. The clerk also denied last night getting an email. It took her more than 20 minutes to find that email before she ended up admitting that indeed she did have the email from the attorney for that said candidate, and then ended up apologizing. Now here's the thing, either your clerk is incompetent and is in over her head, or it's done intentionally. Either way, it is a no-win situation. I will remind you that this is the same municipality that had the problem not too long ago, a few years back, being short ballots when we had a write-in election. You found ballots shoved inside a closet. The reality is the integrity of this election process has been in question for years, and now it's coming to light. You've had a door that was unlocked at 11 o'clock, you had keys that left the building, and you have an attorney that was hired to help oversee this process, who, by the way, also has a contract with the same company that set up the whole Election Central and helped get it going. The reason that you are here is to certify and oversee an election process to make sure that it is done with transparency, fairly and accurately. It is not to be a rubber stamp. And this body has a lot of questions to ask. The clerk who works for you either needs more help or is incompetent. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hello, my name is Irene Queednow, and I'm usually pretty level-headed, but I am livid. For the report of the recount being adopted by the Election Commission, the shall in the charter is more clear and should be followed. But when it says shall for a special mayoral election, it was not clear and it was optional. You are such hypocrites.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Louis Imbriani. I wasn't planning on speaking, but after hearing some of the testimony, I figured I would hop right up. Through the chair, Mr. Peterson, you are the head of the election committee for the assembly. So I really hope that you are listening and taking notes about what's going on. There have been talks from other assembly members about growing the franchise of voters, and it has come to light seeing and hearing what people have to say is that there's disenfranchisement going on. Ms. Lessons actually pointed out a very, very big point, that people were making sophomoric comments and not filling out and taking the election seriously. It's what happens when you have something arrive in the mail that you didn't ask for. I don't know. I have taken a spam mail that has the return to sender, ripped it up, put it back in, and mailed it off because I got it and I didn't want it. I mean, it's different when you ask for something in the mail and you receive it rather than something coming to you that you didn't ask for. I mean, it's great to have participation, but if you don't have adequate participation and educated participation, or people that want to participate, disenfranchisement happens. So I hope that everyone's taking note so that we can make the next one better. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Would anyone else like to speak? Welcome.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman, Alaska resident for 43 years, 20 of those years Anchorage resident, and currently a Valley resident. Note, I follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, the decision made by the governing body is more likely public interest. I came back in the picture with the 2012 election. So respectfully, I predate Barbara Jones's clerk. She came in and respectfully, after there was a question of the previous clerk, and where more than 40% of the polling precincts ran out of ballots even though we printed enough. That was the climate then. And so if there's anyone who's been monitoring elections in Anchorage from the public, it's been me, respectfully. And I've seen and concerned of how elections have been handled. But what I also am concerned nationally is the way comments are going out across the country, and state legislatures are changing election law, and they're not getting a real feel of what needs to be done. They're going in a way, respectively, to restrict inappropriately people voting. We thought as a member of this country, that this period was over back in with the civil rights and votes for people to vote, and that restrictions, we weren't going to see that. But we're seeing it horribly now. And what concerns me is when public comes and addresses, and they have a right to address issues of concern on elections, they're not seeing the clear picture of really what is going on, and they have not been really involved as much as particularly what I've seen. And the end result is there is a false narrative going on across the country, and it's resulted in a situation where state after state, legislature after legislature is taking this kind of information and going forward to restrict the people from voting. And what does that message say to our country and to countries outside, that we're supposed to be a democracy and we're going to this direction? Now, I do have concerns about the local elections, but respectfully, I'm glad Barbara Jones made the announcement to have an election commission meeting on Friday, and that taking this election matter over to certification for the assembly at next meeting. That was the appropriate thing to do, and thank you, Barbara, for doing that. But I'd like to also bring out respectfully that question, and needs to be answered as soon as possible. When a previous speaker did say is, why did you not do a recount of every vote? That needs to be clearly addressed before going forward, and not wait until Tuesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Amber Glasser, for the record. I wasn't going to speak, but I just have a few things to tell all of you, a couple reminders. Number one, we are not AstroTurf. Number two, we are definitely Anchorage grassroots. We are not going anywhere. We are here for the long haul. And I've been in this city and a community member for over 20 years, and the thought of having to sell my house and leave Anchorage was terrifying and devastating, and I'm feeling a little bit hopeful. So if you guys could handle this election stuff properly and maybe get rid of mail-in voting, because it doesn't seem to be working very well, that'd be fabulous. I'd also like to know what's going on with Austin Quinn and her assembly seat. I know we were supposed to have a special election. We didn't do that. So when the new mayor gets put into office, does she just get to have her seat back? And I'm still being underrepresented in my district, and I'm really disappointed about that. There's many things that I'm disappointed about from all of you. You should have ended all the mandates, the mask mandates and everything much sooner than you did, but we know why you didn't do that, and we know why you pulled it when you did. That was political, so way to go, guys. I also testified at the school board meeting last night, and a lot more parents are showing up and speaking up, and because the mandates are lifted, a lot of people are not so afraid to say how they've been feeling for the last 14 months, and I really, really, really hope that you guys start listening to us. And I'm going to say it again, we are not AstroTurf. There are thousands, over 10,000, if not 15 to 20,000 people in this city that are against everything that you're doing. And we want to work with you. We want to have constructive conversation back and forth. We don't want to be ignored. And you know, you guys are really great at ignoring us and not answering emails, and you say that you're busy and this, that, and the other, but really you just don't like the narrative. You don't like the information that we're giving you, and it's really good information, and it's from a lot of really smart people, much smarter than me, who have worked in this city and lived in Alaska for 40, 50 years, and you're just completely ignoring everything that they say. I mean, these people have poured out their heart and soul the last year, and again, this is my first year getting involved, and I will never not be involved, and I can tell you that the thousands of people watching this meeting online right now feel the same way that I do, and we're just learning what to do, and we will never give up on our city ever again.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? All right. Oh, yeah, thank you for that reminder. We're going to go ahead and try Ms. Elledge one more time.
Hello.
Hi, Ms. Elledge. This is Felix Rivera. You're here with the Anchorage Assembly. We are on audience participation.
Yes.
You will have 3 minutes.
Chairman,
Welcome.
could I delay? Thank you so much. Since I am out of state and we had the meeting last night, would it be okay if I testify on the 25th? Would that be allowed instead of tonight?
You can do so on the 25th, but I will say that right now folks are asking questions, which I know members are sort of writing down, and we will be addressing between now and the 25th. So it may be beneficial for you to speak now.
Okay. All right, I will. Thank you.
So if you'd like to speak, you can, the floor
right
is
now?
yours. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Judy Norton Elledge, and I was recently a candidate for the ASD School Board Seat B, and I'm testifying tonight because I'm out of state and was unable to testify last night. I'm going to focus tonight my testimony the fact that last night it was stated that I had not raised a challenge and that the clerk had not received any letter from my attorney to her, the commissioner, responding those challenges. And the letter in question was sent on May 12th to the clerk and all assembly members. That letter was found and they did see it. I would like to address a couple of things in that letter and statements that were made from my understanding last night. Clerk Jones stated last night that all the ballots had been counted, and she made that statement that they had all been counted, or at least that was reported to me, and they were not counted. At the time of the recount, I argued with her and told her that I wanted all the ballots counted, and that was in her email to us, that they would all be counted. She said there was not time to recount all the ballots because they had to recount CE, and they had training 2 days following. I specifically requested recounting the 30,000 ballots that had markings on them, and that had been stated in an interview in ADN. The recount of the number of write-ins, mostly were write-ins. There were about 500 and something write-ins, but there weren't, the adjudicated were not on the sheet that I was getting. So I asked Deputy Clerk McConnell how many adjudicated ballots were counted, and she said about the same. So there was around 1,100 out of the 76,000 that were counted. There was an error in my attorney's letter in identifying the correct term used in a statement by the clerk in an email. It stated that CE was given a recount, even though not within the 0.5 margin to ensure election integrity. Actually, it stated that the clerk had stated it states voter confidence instead of election integrity. And I would just suggest that if a recount is given to ensure voter confidence, it means there might be a problem with election integrity. And I think that came about because there were keys from the cages that were taken home on 2 occasions by municipal employees. The last thing that I want to address was there was great denial about the attorney advising municipality on the election and his relationship to a company involved in counting the ballots. I'm going to read from an email from one of my observers that I received on April 27th, and it said the attorney who was overseeing the adjudication said that his primary role was as an attorney for the municipal clerk. He said he was a project manager for RDI, a local IT firm. I asked if RDI was on contract to support election systems for the municipality, and he told me yes.
Apologies, Ms. Elledge, but your 3 minutes are up. I do have a question for you, though, from Ms. Allard.
Okay.
Ms. Elledge, can you finish reading that last part, but you just have to wrap it up in like a couple sentences.
Yeah, I just, it was, anyway, he chatted with him. I knew, my conclusion was the attorney supporting the integrity of the adjudication was also the owner and employee of the IT firm supporting the Dominion software that was used to collect, store, and report election data. And so I will end with this statement, that if the municipality of Anchorage wishes to restore a vote of confidence in election integrity, these items should be addressed with the clerk, not denials and calling candidates and their teams dishonest for something that they said. And I just think that that needs to be addressed. Yes, everybody works very hard, but it can be very confusing during an election with this all going on, and I don't think that we clearly understood what was going on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Elledge.
Sorry, Ms. Kennedy, we're having issues with your mic.
This one too?
Yeah, that.
Try the other one again. Switch. They might have switched them.
And last week it was this one. This one's okay. All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Elledge, I have a question for you. There's been a couple references to keys. Can you tell me what the question is about keys?
Yes, that was Sammy Graham, who was for Board CE. She was there and overheard them speaking about keys accidentally, I assume, going home that were to the cages where the ballots were locked. She had a discussion with them. I'm sure she would be willing to put that statement in writing to anyone. And she wanted to know why those it never was resolved. She questioned it, but she didn't actually turn in a challenge. But I thought maybe that's why they were recounting, and that's what they meant about voter confidence, because her race was recounted and it was not within the .05 margin.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Elledge.
Thank you so much.
So that concludes our audience participation. The clerk would like to address one of the questions posed, and then any follow-up, we will deal with that on the 25th. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the section of code that I read, and as I've explained to a number of people, it says that election officials shall review all ballots. So, number one, there is the term all ballots. We shall review all ballots. And I want to let you know that we did review all ballots that were cast in these two races. The code continues to determine which votes are to be counted in the recount and to declare which ballots will be recounted. I have explained that we selected 3 different types of ballots to review out of all of the ballots that were cast in the race. We did review the electronic version of the ballots to be adjudicated, those that were written in, and the 20 or so randomly selected ballots. The code continues that after reviewing the ballot images, adjudicating those images, tabulating them. Tabulating means count. We counted all of the ballots that were cast in the race, which is why the results show very similar numbers. The results don't show 1,100. So all of the ballots were retabulated in the recount, and then we will compare that to the original.
Thank you. Ms. Allard, if you have something quick, but otherwise, I think any extensive follow-up should be done on the 25th.
Disregard then.
Thank you. Mr. Constant,
Yeah, mine
same
will
thing.
be very brief, just relative to the comment of Ms. Lessons tonight. When she was talking about a rubber stamp, she was talking about the final vote of the Election Commission, not any action of the Assembly.
Thanks. Yeah, we're going to have Assembly comments here in a minute, so I think those are good for Assembly comments. All right, so seeing nothing else, we're going to go ahead and move on to Assembly comments, and we're going to start on this side of the room with Mr. Perez-Ridia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No comments tonight.
Thank you. Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I still think it is very appropriate to be expressing our thanks to the Election Center staff for all of their hard work over these several months to conduct our election. And I look forward to our continued conversation on the 25th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Nothing, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were some comments made in public testimony tonight that I feel need to be addressed, and perhaps some of my colleagues will address them as well. You know, I served for 2 stints as chair of this body. I also served on the Election Ethics and Elections Committee, although I stepped off when I ran for mayor. In both cases, I worked closely with Ms. Jones, our clerk, and the characterization of her tonight as either incompetent or intentionally miscounting the votes, frankly, is slanderous and is completely untrue. She is one of the best assets that this municipality has. She works incredibly hard, her staff works incredibly hard, and they have displayed nothing but integrity during my 5 years on this body. The one thing I will agree with is the idea that perhaps she needs more help. The Election Center has to complete a very complex task very quickly, and we perhaps have not given them quite the staffing that they need. And that's something we should explore in the next election. But again, the comment that she is either incompetent or is intentionally miscounting ballots is just false. And I would urge people, as we go forward this year, to take a different tone, especially when it comes to our elections, because those kind of baseless accusations undermine our democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I think everybody's a little bit on edge just in terms of how elections seem to be going these days, and there are a lot of questions that people have, and I think that's legitimate. I know for me, you know, my idea of having a recount means that you run every single ballot through the counting machine again, but apparently that's not the way our code is written. So if anything, we have some things in our code that I think to a certain extent probably leaves our staff at a disadvantage because they are basically being called upon to make some decisions that probably most of us would think it just kind of is an unfair thing. So I know I'm going to be looking at some of these codes to help us really have a better approach to what a recount is, because a recount to me apparently is not what is a recount in definition in our code. So the one question that I would like to see answered is exactly the number of ballots that were literally recounted. You know, we were throwing around a number of 1,100, you know, so anyway, I really would like to see what that number is, because apparently we do a sampling, we do not do a recount of all ballots. And we can talk more about standard deviations in that if we want to. We can talk about the mathematics of probability in terms of how that really is, whether or not that is a valid approach. So I think we can have better conversations, but it looks to me like we have a code that has basically left people with the wrong impression and probably has left people with being in a position of making decisions that probably shouldn't be the burden of one person to bear. The other thing I would like some information on is the keys. I keep hearing the story about what happened with the keys, that keys for locking up votes were missing for a couple of days. So I would just like some clarification on what happened there. But other than that, it is true. This is, I'm sure, an arduous process to go through. It's stressful. Obviously, there are, there are things in all of this that will make people feel like they've lost something or won something, and there's going to be a sense of unfairness. And if we don't have a process that is transparent, not that anybody's intentionally doing anything wrong, but if it doesn't look transparent to the public, if the public can't understand the process, then we do have something that we need to address just to make that better. In terms of understanding how this process works and giving people the ability to trust in the process. So that is what I think we can work on. So I hope that we will do that with more answers to some of these questions and with a better conversation to come. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
No comments.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So a couple of comments from me. First is regarding a question that was asked during audience participation. So come July 1st, once the new administration and the new mayor is seated, now acting Mayor Quinn Davidson will come back to her seat as an assembly member, and actually she will, on July 1st, come back to her role as assembly chair. So that hopefully answers that question that was asked. So regarding the election, I'm looking forward to the 25th, where I'm sure we will be able to go into more detail on some of the questions being asked. But in general, the clerk and the elections team has truly been under a microscope this election cycle. Pressure from all sides and questions from all sides. And under that maelstrom of energy, I believe the clerk and our elections team has done an amazing job trying to keep up with the countless requests that are received. So a huge kudos to the election team and especially to the clerk for helping to manage all of that. I guess I'll end with, every election cycle, the clerk and the elections team does a great job of outlining any issues that happened in the election and any changes that need to happen, which get funneled through both the Anchorage Elections Commission and the Assembly Ethics and Elections Committee. So looking forward to that process, and then eventually any suggestions via an ordinance that come forward to change any of our election processes. This is something that is done every election. Before we had vote by mail, we did this, and we'll probably keep doing this, keep perfecting our democracy for every future election. So that's all that I had. Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on actually the chair's comments, a reminder that the annual review of elections code will be beginning this summer, and it's a process that is open to everyone. That's Title 28. And I too would like to express appreciation to Ms. Jones, Ms. McConnell, Mr. Wheeler, and the entire elections team for their hard work, for their integrity. And yes, they could use more resources. Like many areas of municipal government, one of the things that we've done through the years is cut other departments to fund public safety, and I think that when it comes to the clerk's office and elections, as Mr. Dunbar said, they could use more support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to also thank the election teams and our municipal clerk, Ms. Jones, for our Herculean effort that they put forth to get these ballots processed and adjudicated in a timely manner. It's a very challenging thing, and it's been difficult to try to keep our election team together especially during the time of the pandemic. And so we trained new members for the most recent count, and I think everything went on as quickly as it could be done correctly. And we will get more information as we go forward, and we will be certifying this election on the 25th, next Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Allard.
Thank you, Chair. I do not in any way am envious of Mrs. Jones' job. It's a very difficult position to be in, especially when there are very close races. I mean, this is what happens during the election season. But one thing I will say is I do have concerns about the keys. I do have concerns about a conflict of interest with Mr. Miller. I'd also like to state that when I ask questions on public record, that the clerk does tell me that I need to put those questions in writing. And so as a public official, if I ask a question, I know, Ms. Jones, that you're sharp on your codes, and so I rely on you for your answers. And because of that, when I'm in a committee meeting, when I'm on work session, I like those answers publicly and announced at those work sessions so the public can hear it and there's clear transparency. But I will tell you through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, everybody has different experiences. I have been yelled at by the clerk. I have been put a hand in my face and told to stop talking. I am an elected official, and I have been pushed back, and I will say the letter that the assembly attorney, the clerk's office, along with the ethics committee, D. Ennis, sent out to all of us assembly members, to me was an intimidation factor. I represent my district, and because I represent my district, I should have the ability to ask questions without it being a conflict of interest. That is my right as an elected official that was actually elected by the people of my district. So before anybody starts chastising the public, everybody has different experiences. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn, and then we will begin our second meeting in about 10 minutes or so.
So moved.
We are adjourned.